Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about class method and static method in Python. So before we start our discussion on the class method and static method, let's take a step back and quickly recap what are instance methods. So here I have a class called employee. There is this class instance or class variable called raise percentage. So this remains same for all the objects of this class. And then here I have the constructor. And I have two instance variables, the name and the salary. Now, let's say we want to create a function or a method to apply the raise. So let's just go ahead and create the method. How we would do it, we have seen this in the previous classes. So let's call it apply raise. Self is always the first argument. I hope you remember from the previous classes. And then let's say this doesn't take any input. Now self dot salary. So we are updating the salary. The new salary is the previous salary, the old salary, multiplied by the raise percentage. And let's just go ahead and convert this to integer. I'll also put self dot before this. And let's just go ahead and make it a round number by converting it to an integer data type. And we know how to call this apply raise. So let's create an employee. Let's call him Ajay. So this is an object of Ajay class. The name of the person is Ajay. The salary is 50,000. And if you check the salary of Ajay dot salary, that is 50,000. Now, if you apply this apply raise function, what will be the new salary of Ajay? So this doesn't take any argument or input. Self is implicitly passed. So now if I look at Ajay's salary, you see the increment has been applied. Now this is called as instance method, right? The most common way in which you will write a method inside a class. It takes self as the first parameter. All instance method takes self as the first parameter, which basically represents the object itself. So this apply raise can access and modify both the instance variable and the class variable. So here it is modifying the instance variable. Now, key things to remember here is that to call this function, you require an instance of this class, employee. The first argument of this instance function is always self. And we can read and write the instance attributes and also access our class variables or attributes. So that is our instance method. Now we also have something called as class method. So now what are these class methods? So instance method, while they work on the instance of a particular class, the class method work on the class itself, not on specific instance. So let's define a class method. So you mark the class method with @class method. And then let's just call our method set raise percentage. So I'm creating a method to basically update this raise percentage value. Now the first argument of a class method is always CLS. So instead of self, this takes the class, the reference of the class as the first parameter. And let's say the user inputs the amount of the raise. And then this raise percentage is updated. So CLS dot raise percentage. is equal to amount. Now this right here is a class method. This is how you define it. The first parameter is CLS. You basically mark them with class @class method. Now the first argument as we have seen is CLS. You can modify the class level state, right? The class level state that applies to all the instances. So this raise percentage applies to all the instances. So you can go ahead and modify that inside a class method. So let's just try this out. So I have Ajay here. I'll just run it again. This is the salary of Ajay. And then to call this set raise percentage, I can just say employee, the class name, dot set raise percentage. And let's just give the amount here. Let's say the amount is 1.2. Now, if you check what is the value of raise percentage, you can easily do just by using the class dot. You see, this has been updated to 1.2. If let's say we now apply a raise for Ajay and check his salary, you see this is his updated salary. But generally, you would use these class methods as alternative constructors. So sometimes what happens, you want to create an object in a different way. So right now, how do you create the object? You give the class name followed by whatever are the instance variables here, right? You pass the values for those. That is how you create an object. But let's say you have a string instead of uh, having all these values, the name and the salary, you have a string which has the name and the salary of the employee. So in this case, you want to have an alternative way to create the object of this employee class. So let's see how we can build this alternative constructor using class method. So let's define our class method. Again, we have to mark it with this class method. And let's just call our function from string. Want to create object of this employee class from string. CLS is the first argument. The second argument is the employee string, which is passed to this. And then this employee string is a string data type, of course. So let's split it on dash because let's say the user input something like this. The name, dash, and then the salary. So we'll split it on this dash here, and we'll get a list with name and the salary. So let's just capture that into variables name and salary. Call these variables whatever you like. And then using this name and salary, you basically call this init method. So for that, you have to say return CLS, right, which is like a reference to this particular class, dot, not dot, CLS, name, and salary. We're passing the value for name and salary here. So let's say now instead of having the name and the salary as two separate variables, you have a string where you have the name and the salary separated by dash. So how would you create an object of this employee class using that string? You can basically call this from string function. How do you call a method, a class method? The class name followed by dot operator followed by the function name. And let's pass the employee string to it. The value for the CLS variable here is implicitly passed. You don't have to explicitly provide the values. And let's say this is what I want to pass. Let's just call it employee2. And let's go ahead and check the type of this variable employee2. You see, employee2 is an object of this employee class. If you want, we can also check the name of employee2. Employee2 dot name. Name is Rohan. Check his salary. 60,000. And you must be wondering, why would you do this? Like, why not write the passing code here, this line here, outside of the class? So first, it is cleaner to write inside of the class, right? And the second reason is that you want to encapsulate the object creation logic inside the class itself. That is what classes are for. So object creation logic resides within the class. So this is how you will find yourself using the class method, right? Or having these alternative constructors. Now let's talk about the static method. So let's say you want to create a function to check if it is a workday or not. Let's go ahead and write a definition of a function to check whether it's workday or not. You give the day to it and it will return whether it's a workday or not, so true or false. The condition that we want to check is day dot weekday. If it's a weekday, it's a workday, we are assuming. Otherwise, it is not. Weekday is less than 5. Now think about it. Should it be an instance method? Is it specific to a particular employee? Or this information is constant across different employees? So seems like that this is not specific to any instance. So what about class method then? Should it be class method? But class method are used to, change the value of the class variables or maybe act as a alternative constructor. So this one doesn't fit either the instance method or the class method. This one will better fit static method. What is a static method? First, to define it, you have to use or mark this with static method. Now this becomes your static method. Another thing to note here is that it doesn't take self or CLS as first argument. And what is this static method and why is it within the class? Because it's not operating on my class variables, it's not operating on my instance variables. It even doesn't say takes the self or class as the first argument. So these static methods are just functions which are placed inside a class for logical grouping. Because it makes sense to have this function inside an employee class, although it doesn't operate on any of the employee data. So this is just for logical grouping, so that you have all the things related to employee at one place. It gives you good encapsulation. So how do we call this static method? So for that, we have to first create a date. So let's just import date time module. So let's specify a date. Date time dot date. The year first, and the month, then the date. Let's save it in a variable myDate. Now to call the static method, you use the class name followed by the name of the function. I'm going to pass myDate to it. And let's see what happens. So it's returning true, right? It's supposed to return true or false. So the static method, as we have seen, doesn't have access to the instance or the class state. It behaves like a normal function, but we are just grouping it inside a class for relevance. So let's put it all together. What we have done in this class, we can create employees from string, set company wide raise, percentages, and check if it's a workday, all by using the right method type, which are instance methods, class method, and static method. Once again, a quick recap. Instance methods are for working with individual objects. Class methods are for working with the class itself. And static methods are utility functions that belong to the class conceptually. They are inside the class conceptually, but they do not take the self or the CLS as the first argument. That's all for this one, guys. Thank you for watching.